There we go, that's a little more light on my face. I hope you guys are doing well today. Today we are talking about filters. And before you skip this, I want to let you know you should have at least a basic understanding of camera filters, the ones that you put on the front of your lens, if you're doing any sort of photography, cinematography, or just interested in filmmaking. You see, all your favorite Netflix shows or anything that you're watching, maybe it's on Disney Plus or Amazon Prime, whatever. You should start getting paid by these guys to mention them so often. But any of those shows you're watching, the cinematographers are almost guaranteed to be using at least 1 or 2, sometimes 3, even 4 different filters stacked in front of the lens. And we're gonna talk today about why filters are important and why you may wanna start considering adding them to your arsenal as a filmmaker, videographer, photographer. Even if you're shooting on an iPhone, there are filters that are gonna really help you. And I wanna do kind of a medium deep dive into that today, but I love filters. I'm always using them on the front of my lens, so we're gonna talk about that today. But before I get into that, I wanted to show you guys something. I actually forgot to mention like a month ago that we finally got our FX6 in. It made me thinking, Mark, don't you already have one? I saw the footage you shot on it. That was actually a loaner, but we finally got the one that we bought in. The bummer is we don't have the memory cards yet. Sony, Henry's, guys, we need these memory cards. Please send them to us. Without those memory cards, it's just this beautiful paperweight that we have on the shelf here. But at least we still have this guy, the FX9, which I'm gonna be using this guy to talk about filters. Man, I love all these little light panels and light tubes. In this case, I just gripped it to the edge of the cupboard here. Give me more little light on my face. So talking about filters, and we're gonna talk about 4 filters today. We're gonna talk about mist filters, which you've probably been seeing a lot of the craze on that online right now. They've been around for a while, but PolarPro has launched like their Peter McKinnon one here that you can thread on to the front of your mirrorless camera, or the base cam system like this, where you have the full-on filter tray. You have your typical ND, variable ND. This is just cutting the light that's actually hitting your sensor. And then you have polarizers, which are used to often change the reflections that come off windows or water. They help you be able to see through or add reflection to things. I just used this matte box on a professional car commercial that I was shooting, and it was great because we had the polarizer in there and I was able to dial out all the reflections in the window when I needed to be able to look through the window. It was great having this matte box on set. And then the last filter we're gonna talk about is a gradient, a neutral density gradient, which essentially part of the filter, actually it's just quicker to show you. Half of the filter here has the ND in it, and then the other half is clear. So what's really great for these is you're able to use them on skies when your sky is brighter than the foreground. They're great for sunsets. We'll talk about that quickly. But the question that I get a lot is, well, why don't I just do this in post? Because don't I have more control in post? And to a certain degree that is true. You can emulate some of these filters in post-production. The difference is with that is you're usually affecting the entire image, where when you put a filter in front of the lens, it's affecting the light that's actually reaching the sensor. And it's gonna be, to use an overused term, more organic. It's naturally what's occurring. And the more you can do things on set and in camera, usually the more authentic it will look and the more character that it has. You hear me talking about this a lot with filters and lenses, why you want character. And that's why I love to use mist filters, because mist takes the digital sharpness out of your cameras. See, cameras are just computers. They're ones and zeros. Where when you used to shoot on film, it was an actual organic process. It was film celluloid. You can see this footage that I shot, I think back in like 2008 of my sister with her first child. This was shot on 16 mil film, and I love film. There's nothing that can still replace it today. There's just that beautiful roll off in the highlights. It doesn't seem as sharp. It feels real because it's not a computer. It's not ones and zeros. So when you shoot on cinema cameras, no matter how beautiful they are, there often can be a little bit of that digital sharpness coming through. And that's why using a mist filter will help bloom the highlights, it'll help soften the skin tones, and overall, it'll give your image a bit more character. And I love that. That's why my favorite lens, where is it? Don't worry, that wasn't a lens. This is why the Helios 44-2 is one of my favorite lenses right now, because there just is so much character in the images that this renders. So that's why for me, I'm almost always gonna have a mist filter on the front of my camera. I want the highlights to be a bit more bloomed, because when you shoot a street light with a digital camera at night, it's really just a sharp circle. But when you put the mist filter in it, it begins to bloom, and it can help you if you have a camera that doesn't have good latitude, good dynamic range. It can help soften and give a bit of a gradient to the areas in your image that are clipping, and again, give them a little more character. So that is mist filters in a nutshell. And if you've been watching my channel for any length of time, you often see me shooting with this matte box on the front of it. It's the base camp. They've just added a second stage so you can put 2 filters in at the same time. That's the advantage over just using screw-on filters, is you can only really do 1 at a time, or when you start stacking 2, they all start spinning against each other. But this, with the tray slots, you can drop in a gradient, you can drop in a mist, and you can even have your variable ND going at the same time as well. And people are always asking me, well, isn't there variable ND built into the Sony? Yes, there is, but when you're shooting wide open like I do, sometimes you need a little extra ND than the Sony can actually offer, and that's why I love having the base camp on here. And also too, when you have a matte box, it can keep anything hitting the front of your lens. I shot a last scene of a short film last year and it was pouring rain, but I just came in and I got the French flag, put it on the front of the matte box, and it kept all the rain off of it. And then we let a little water hit it to give it some more character again, gave the image a little more of an interesting look. But it was amazing that I was in pouring rain and nothing was hitting the front of the lens. But I'm kind of tired of bending over, so let's go sit at my desk and I'll go over the last few filters. Okay, wow. All right, we're back in it and we're finally doing it. Where was I? We were talking about filters. Kind of just told you a bit about the mist, why you kind of want to be using mist. One of my favorite times to use mist is at night. You can see some of these shots. I'm with my buddy Zach Ramlin. It's before pandemic and all that. Getting to shoot him at night, and you can see the highlights here. The lights in the background, they're blooming. You can see how soft his skin tone is. You can also see these shots of Elisha here at night in the city, how much it blooms, how nice and soft the roll off of the highlights is, and these shots down at the lake of the sun setting. It just gives it a bit more of a warm glow. Again, a bit more of that filmic look. And then when you add a bit of grain and post on footage that has a mist filter, it starts blurring that line between what is digital and what is film. It's a great way to approach your footage. Also, a filter I forgot to tell you guys about. Yes, this Bluemorphic filter. Now, when Polar Pro sends you these, they don't write big Bluemorphic, it's just down there in the corner. But my camera assistant on that commercial likes everything labeled really big. Just quickly talk about this. This is an interesting filter because this has these lines. Can you see it there? Don't focus on me, camera. It's on the filter. Regardless, there's lines here. If you want to see them up closer, go look at the video link on Polar Pro's website with Danny Gervitz. Not sponsored by Polar Pro for this video, but I do love their filters. The Bluemorphic filter gives you the light streaks. There's also a gold morphic filter, which gives you warmer streaks. I prefer the blue because to me that feels a bit more like an actual anamorphic lens. Now, it doesn't replace anamorphic lenses, but it does give you that character that's inherent to anamorphic lenses with the blue streaks. You can see some of this footage downtown here. It's really fun. Pat here doing some flips in the middle of Dundas Square. It's a vibe. The Bluemorphic filter's fun. It's not the right thing for everything, but there's certainly moments that it helps enhance your footage, like Callie running through the gym here. Just gives a little bit of that subtle blue highlight streak to the lights above her head. So there's an extra bonus filter, but we were talking about mists. Now let's talk about NDs. You guys have heard enough about this. ND is neutral density. What's great is it cuts light without shifting your color. I was just talking to someone recently who's saying, how do I shoot outdoors to indoors? And I was like, well, you need a variable ND, because this way you're not adjusting your f-stop, which is going to change your depth of field, and you're going to see those annoying steps when you adjust the color. You're gonna be able to subtly change the amount of light hitting your lens so you can adjust the exposure on the fly, and it feels more natural, more organic, and doesn't take people out of your story. So if you're shooting documentary or following a subject, anything where you don't know how it's going to turn out, even if you're on a feature film, variable NDs can really help you nail the focus in areas where your light is changing. The next thing I want to talk about is circular polarizers. This just changes the wavelengths of the light that's hitting your lens so you can add or take away the reflections. You can see this shot here from our Untitled film where Natasha was driving. I had to have a circular polarizer on the front of my camera, or else all of those reflections that you're seeing go across the windshield would have blocked her face and you would have just seen a car driving rather than seeing the main character. So I quickly screwed on a variable ND to actually the A7 III here, and I used a suction cup rig and threw that on the front of the car, and that way we're able to see her. So if you, again, are a cinematographer, you absolutely need a circular polarizer and you absolutely need variable NDs, and you probably should have some mist filters as well. They're gonna really help the way you shoot, and you're gonna be able to control the light hitting your camera. And there's actually a lot of different types of mist filters. You have Pro Mist, you have Hollywood, you have Black Mist, you have Black Satin. There's just a whole list of different type of filters that do the similar things as the Polar Pros Mist. You got to try them out, figure out what's right for you. Some of them, to me, can go a bit too far and start making it look like kind of like the telenovela soap opera films. So that's why you want to be careful how much mist you're applying to your image, so you can mess around with that. The last filter I think we'll talk about is the gradient ND. Now this is helpful when you're shooting sunsets and you have someone in the foreground, because if you're gonna expose to the sky, but you have a low ambient light hitting your foreground, you're gonna have a huge dynamic range problem. But the gradient ND allows you to take down the exposure on the sky while still leaving enough information in your foreground so it looks like you lit the scene. It's a quick way to adjust a scene without having lights. It would probably be the thing I use least out of all the filters, but when you do need it, it is super, super helpful. Just being able to take down that sky a bit. And what's great too with this matte box system is you can adjust the height of the gradient ND where it's placed. So when you're able to adjust that gradient, you can adjust where you need it without having to actually adjust your shot. You can adjust the filter. So it gives you a bit more creativity and allows you to do more things. So there you go, guys. That's a quick crash course on filters. Just to recap that again, mist filters, they're gonna help you bloom the highlights, take that nasty digital roll off, really help the skin tones, make them smoother, makes your image overall have a bit more character, softens it up, and for me, makes it feel more filmic, which in turn can feel more cinematic. But that's mist filters. Then you have your standard variable ND, being able to control the light, really important for anyone who is in a situation where your lights change at all. Then you have polarization filters, important for when you're shooting reflections, especially on car commercials, which I'm shooting more of those these days, it feels like, so you really need to have a polarizer if you're shooting any sort of reflections. And then lastly, your variable ND. This is being able to control how much exposure is hitting the sky and also allowing more light to hit your foreground. So awesome, guys. Leave a comment below. I've put all the links to all the filters I use. Again, like I said, this video is not sponsored, but I primarily use Polar Pro these days. They sent me some gear a year ago and I've just fallen in love with their filters, especially this matte box system. It's super helpful for documentary and it's really lightweight. It doesn't add much weight to my camera at all. But then again, I don't mind a heavy camera because it helps you take away all the camera shake and it's just easier to control than a tiny little mirrorless camera. But thanks guys for watching, and I will see you on the next one. It's the Bone Zone.